Well, according to multiple reports, the Trump administration is applying heavy economic pressure on the Palestinians. And here's just an example of that. It says in the Informed Palestine magazine, it says Trump administration seeks to withhold millions in aid to Palestinians. Now, certainly we knew about that already, but now on top of that, of what has already been frozen or cut off, now there's additional. And reading from the article, it says the White House is seeking to withhold up to $200 million in relief aid for Palestinian civilians in Gaza and the West Bank, severing a vital humanitarian lifeline at a time of rising political and security tensions in the area, according to 3 diplomatic sources. The amount represents nearly all of the humanitarian aid the United States provides directly to the Palestinians. Washington also contributes to the budget of the United Nations agency that helps Palestinian refugees, but the administration has slashed that aid and appears to have no immediate plans to provide more. Congress has already appropriated $230 million in economic support funds for private relief groups in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. But the officials decided they would ask lawmakers to withhold most of the funds, according to the diplomatic sources, who preferred not to be identified discussing sensitive issues. A spokesman for the UN Relief Fund told Foreign Policy that many other states have taken up some of the slack, noting that an unprecedented $200 million in new funds have been committed to the UN refugee program since January, including $100 million from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Another $38 million has also been pledged by Belgium, Cyprus, Denmark, the Holy See, Ireland, Malta, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. But the UNRWA continues to have a shortfall of $217 million, he said. So that just gives you an idea of how much the United States actually supported the Palestinian effort, and you can see how much that the other nations, especially the Arab nations around the Palestinian Authority, they simply did not support the Palestinians at all. In fact, as I've said before, Iran gives nothing to the Palestinians other than terror funding. So most of the nations around the world who are making all the noise and condemning the United States for cutting off this funding haven't picked up the slack that the United States left. And this is all in the name of trying to get the Palestinians to come back to the table. And I don't blame the United States for saying we're not going to support an organization, a terrorist group, and we're certainly not going to support a would-be nation if they're not willing to come to the negotiation table and try to work things out and listen to our plan. Why in the world would they support that? With basically over $500 million. If they want to continue to do things their way, then they're going to have to pay for it. And when I mean pay for it, I mean they'll have to fit their own bill. Again, that's like your entitled cousin coming in living with you and saying that he wants to do this, this, and this. And he wants a certain amount for an allowance and doesn't want to work, but yet he wants you to support him fully. So I look at the Palestinian Authority and their supposed ancestors, refugees who are claiming land in Israel, as a group of entitled nomads that simply won't get a job, won't work. And it's been proven time and again that people who were at one time refugees who finally settled down in another country finally got jobs and are now settled into those countries as citizens. The Palestinians are a unique breed to themselves. They have always been considered refugees. They've never tried to get out of that refugee status, when every other nation who began the refugee status years and years ago are now, like I said, acclimated to the country in which they've immigrated to. And they still continue to think the United States is going to fit the bill. That falls right into another article that I've also been looking at. It's just from Ynet News. It says, report U.S. plans to strip Palestinian descendants of refugee status. Of course, the Palestinians are going to say that that's just an effort by the United States to put more pressure on them to come to the negotiating table. They are still entitled to their refugee status and their supposed, what they believe is their land in Israel. And this is what the article says. Jared Kushner, senior advisor and son-in-law to U.S. President Donald Trump, has reportedly been looking into the possibility of stripping the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip of their refugee status, consequently removing the issue of a Palestinian right of return from negotiations table, according to a report in Foreign Policy magazine on Friday. Foreign Policy obtained email correspondence between Kushner and members of his team, including Special Envoy Jason Greenblatt, discussing the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. It is important to have an honest and sincere effort to disrupt UNRWA. This agency perpetuates a status quo, is corrupt, inefficient, and doesn't help peace, Kushner wrote in an email from January 11th. I agree with Mr. Kushner. This basically gives no incentive as long as they are being supported. It gives them no incentive to, number one, get a job, number two, settle in an area where they can get a job. And as long as the United States is still fitting the bill for them to live free of charge, they're never coming to the negotiations table. But back to the article, it says, according to Hanan Hashiri, I guess that's how you pronounce the name, it says a member of the Executive Committee of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Kushner believes the resettlement has to take place in the host countries, and these governments can do the job that the UNRWA was doing. In other words, they want to get rid of this relief fund, and they'd like to disperse and place these refugees who are being funded by this relief fund in the care of the host country. So if you live in Algeria or wherever it is you may live, that country will be challenged to do for you what this relief fund has been doing all these many years. And I have to believe that in some way that the United Nations, of course the United States as well, will have to fit that bill as well, but it won't be as great with everybody, hopefully with everybody contributing. Ashri said the White House wanted rich Arab countries or Gulf states to cover the costs of the move. They want to take a really irresponsible, dangerous decision, and the whole region will suffer. And here's informational proof about that. It says, in June, Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat said Kushner was willing to stop funding the UNRWA altogether and transferring the $300 million the U.S. gives the agency to Jordan and other Arab nations who would take in the Palestinians. Wait and see if that actually comes to pass. We've been listening to the babble of the modern Arab world and other Islamic nations for years about the Palestinian cause, but they've always been unwilling to bankroll it, even though they have the money to do so. So if they want these refugee Palestinian relief funds that come out of the UN to continue to thrive, they're going to have to support it and bankroll it. And simply put, I don't think that's going to happen. And they certainly don't have the funds to continue to pump in some 500 million plus or even better that the United States is withholding. And even with that said, and with the Arab world putting in some money, and of course the European Union, they're still over $200 million short. So I have to admit that the Trump administration is handling this superbly. And I trust and hope that they will continue to do this in order to, if nothing else, stop the wasteful giving away of hundreds of millions of dollars to a refugee fund that simply should no longer exist. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is this article that indicates that it says Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Why the U.S. has declared economic war against them. The thing I look at this right here is that the United States hasn't even fired a shot at any one of these three countries, but their currency has immediately dropped and plunged since the United States has either put sanctions on them or has applied tariffs to some of the goods that they may be sending to the United States. Like I said, this is not a real war, if you will. It's just an economic decision that only the United States could make. Now, certainly, I guess the European Union could make somewhat the same decision, but they're really not in any position to do so. They're the biggest exporter in the European Union, I should say importer as well, is Germany. And many of the nations in the European Union are export driven. They're not really import driven like the United States is. And, that sets the United States apart from all other nations. They have a monstrous marketplace that is almost uniquely import driven. In other words, we buy a tremendous amount of goods. And that's why that these high tariffs that we're about ready to place on multiple countries, including the European Union, are so effective because we have an import-driven country. And I have to say that that's one reason why I believe the United States will end up being Mystery Babylon, because we're making the whole world rich and have been doing so this whole generation. And I have in the near future, I am going to be doing a Mystery Babylon video that will give you loads of proof, biblical proof that is, regarding why the United States probably will end up being Mystery Babylon. Let's face it, if we are living in the last days, there is a nation that the Bible describes that will rise up in the last days, who will make the whole world rich, and when their dollar or when their currency falls, the whole world will be in trouble. And one of the reasons why that this will probably be a supernatural defeat is because when Satan comes onto the world stage, and he will right after the war in heaven, he will bring his demons with him, and the only thing that will stand between him and total power over the world will be, I believe, the United States and their economy. Let's face it right now that the United States is the world leader, not only with their military, but also with their financial grip on the world currencies. And as I've said, they are an importer that most of the world cannot do without. And I know that for some of you that's hard to believe, but like I said, I will be giving you proof as to why this is probably going to be the case. But as we talk about what's going on in these last days, you need to keep your eyes on this Palestinian Israeli broader region peace accord that I believe is on the verge of being released. And Mr. Kushner said that it's not up to the Palestinians they're not the ones standing in the way. He says that when the time is right, that this peace accord will be released. That's something you need to keep your eyes on. Also, you need to keep your eyes on this development of Russia, Turkey, and Iran, and how they are now communicating with each other more than ever, and are creating an alliance not only through economics but also militarily. And, Mr. Erdogan from Turkey says that the United States in their tariffs and other sanctions that they are applying to Turkey are in essence severing their tie with Turkey. And I have a feeling that as time goes on, you will see the severing of that tie take place, and they will at some point officially join the Turkish, Russian, and Iranian alliance. And they may even leave NATO. That's probably the likely outcome. And if you don't know the Lord, today is the day of salvation. As we head toward the last days, the final days, and I mean the 7-year tribulation period, there will be a rapture that will take place beforehand. You don't want to be left behind to go through what the Bible describes as the most horrible time period that's ever taken place. But there's something worse than that. You could die today, and if you die without Christ, you're going to go to hell. And once you go to hell, you can't get out. 150,000 people will die today. The Bible says that the vast majority will end up in that burning hell. Don't let that happen to you. Come to the Lord, ask Him to save you today. And you Christians, you need to get a copy of my Tribulation Period Survival Guide. Go down to the description section in this video, click on the link, and that will take you to where you can either buy the paperback version that you can personally hand your lost loved one, and they'll have that copy on hand once the rapture takes place. Or you can get the digital version, which is actually free. It's written in nine different languages. And you can place that on either their device, their tablet, their computer, or whatever the case. But don't delay. Get that copy today. Well, this is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.